Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Snap Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Lando, and I am here to talk to you about Keenan Allen, a wide receiver that seems to be either disrespected or respected, depending on who you talk to. I'm here to kind of talk you through today my feelings toward him and work out the issues. I'm not really sure what to do with him and where I'm going to take him in fantasy drafts, but I'm here to talk it through just to see and work it out and see how I feel about him. So, Keenan Allen is a guy that has been a very inconsistent wide receiver one, it seems like, in a lot of years. He is now with a new quarterback in LA, and he's a guy that, depending on who you are drafting with, will go later and later in your fantasy drafts, or if you're in your home leagues where people just look at the names and the star power, will go earlier in the third round ahead of a guy like Cortland Sutton, DJ Moore, which is also very interesting, where we as a podcast prefer DJ Moore quite a bit and we see the upside in him, but Keenan Allen presents kind of an interesting middle ground of safety and risk, anyway, in your perception anyway. So I'm going to go through some of these stuff I have found on him and his consistency ratings. We'll talk about Tyrod a little bit and what I project the LA Chargers to do in 2020. So if you look at his stats over the past 3 years, they're great. He's been awesome. Like as a wide view, last year he had almost 1,200 yards. Year before, same thing, almost identical. And the year before that, almost 1,400 yards with 6 touchdowns. He has scored 6 touchdowns every single year in the past 3 years, so that's a pretty consistent thing. Last year, I projected Keenan Allen almost identical to what he finished, but he had pretty much back-to-back years with Phillip Rivers, producing almost the same numbers for the past 2 years. Now, again, on paper, over 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns is okay, but did that really help you win your fantasy leagues? And how confident are you starting him in that wide receiver 1 role, or would you want him as your wide receiver 2, 3 on your teams this year? So, number 1, I'm going to go with consistency, because that is what we see in Keenan Allen. We see season splits where he's really good for the first half of the year and then falls off in the second, or you can't trust him first half and then he really bounces back for that second half year, and the numbers really back that up. So last year in 2019, 15% of the time he was a wide receiver 1, but then 50, he was a wide receiver 4 50% he was a top 24 guy, which is great. I think generally you want him to produce that number. But like I was saying, 50% of the time, he's a wide receiver 4 or worse. That's like a guy, you don't perceive a guy like Keenan Allen, the slot PPR guy, to be a wide receiver 4 or worse, that high amount of percentage. That's a guy like Tyreek Hill. The only other guy in the top end wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, a very sporadic wide receiver, has had that same amount of wide receiver 4 numbers. So really, he just disappears and really hurts you. Now, if you go over the wide range, the last 3 years, it's a little bit better. He was a wide receiver 1 just about 30% of the time, which is really good. But still, 40% of the time, he's a wide receiver 4 or worse. So he has whether it's a tendency to get locked up by the DB or just disappear. Anyways, with Phillip Rivers, that's what we saw with Keenan Allen. That's why I think every year he gets a little bit disrespected or overdrafted, depending on if you project him to make that step forward. He has not done that in the past couple of years, which I guess will show or reflect his draft value. So right now, on average, he's going in the early to mid 5th round, and that's pretty good. So if you go wider, if you go running back, he could be your 3rd wide receiver, which is great. Some people, if you look at home leagues, they may be taking him in the 3rd round, and that is far too rich for my blood. But then you see him also in some leagues getting drafted in the 7th round in fantasy drafts, and that is a little bit ridiculous. That's just a That is an absolute disrespect for Keenan Allen, and that is something that some people really I don't understand. I mean, the numbers don't lie. In half-point leagues, it's more of a 4th round guy, so he's your wide receiver 2, and then in those leagues, I guess it's 5th round. My bad. Anyways, I'm learning on the fly. I'm trying to work it out with you guys, looking at the stats here to try to talk through Keenan Allen. So I posted a poll on Twitter, and I do that on snap_fantasy. Give us a follow if you want to look into any of our stuff. We do polls all the time. We have any stats, any really good stats we found. We do Who Am I, a little fun game where we put out stats. And the difference between those Who Am I games, it's a lot of perceived value. If you perceive someone better than they are or worse than they are, the numbers don't lie. And that's where you get kind of an interesting either surprise on who our player is, like a guy like Marvin Jones that has been 30% of wide receiver 1, for example, which is amazing, and he's getting taken super late in fantasy drafts. And then Keenan Allen might surprise you as well, how inconsistent he is. So let me look at the poll I did on Twitter, and I asked, how do you value Keenan Allen in 2020? And number 1, I had an undervalued wide receiver 1, a locked-in wide receiver 2, and the stay away wide receiver 3 or plus. So locked-in wide receiver 2-1 was 65% of the votes. 12% of you voted for a wide receiver 3 or worse, and then a locked-in or an undervalued wide receiver 1 was about 23%. So there is a little bit of a differentiation of opinions about Keenan Allen, and I think as a podcast, we also aren't really sure what to think about him. But I seem to end up with him in a lot of drafts, especially if I go running back heavy early, and then I'm looking for the value at wide receiver, whether that's between Courtland Sutton or Keenan Allen. Both have quarterbacks that aren't really trusted in the NFL community, and Tyrod has not really shown recently that he could do that. He played in 8 games last year for the Chargers, but only had 4 attempts. So you can't really look at stuff until he played in Cleveland. And then he only had about a 50% completion percentage. He got surpassed by Baker Mayfield fairly quickly. And then Baker really showed out and had a really good rookie year. So I don't know if that was necessarily fair for Tyrod Taylor. But when he was with Buffalo, he did throw for about 3,000 passing yards. He had about a 62% completion percentage, which is middle of the pack. That's fairly good. He's a fairly accurate quarterback. Now, his yards per attempt weren't great, around that 6 yards per attempt, 6.5. And again, that's not really bad. And I think that does bode well for a guy like Keenan Allen that gets those short yardage, slant routes, where Mike Williams is with Phillip Rivers anyways. He was that deep 50-50 ball. And most of the time he came up with those balls, which is amazing. But Keenan Allen should be the locked-in guy maybe in the slot. He could go to the X wide receiver, but still kind of run across the field and get those targets. He's got great hands. He's a good route runner. And what I do like about the LA Chargers offense is that it is a consolidated target share, which I like, and I've talked about a little bit, where 51% of the targets went to wide receivers. Which I guess is, let me see, that's bottom 6 in the NFL. That can't be right. Either way, like there's Austin Eckler, which should get a fair amount of targets. Hunter Henry, we're projecting to do well, but he hasn't stayed healthy. So I think this offense has a potential with Tyrod at the helm to be a very good passing attack. If Justin Herbert comes in, that's where the risk is involved with Keenan Allen. And that's where I see him maybe going in that 5th, 6th round. That would be, I guess, a pretty shocking thing. But maybe not too shocking, because in a dynasty startup, I took Keenan Allen at the 6-12. The 6-12, Mr. Value. And I know it was a dynasty startup, but he's only 28 years old. People forget and think he's 30, but he's not. He still has some good 2-3 years of decent production left, especially if Herbert takes a step forward and is a somewhat accurate quarterback. I don't love Justin Herbert for the team per se in LA, but I think for fantasy, Herbert presents upside with his legs. So that's, I guess, where the risk is baked in. So for me, I believe I am very comfortable with Keenan Allen being my third wide receiver. And that might depend on makeup of your team. If you have very safe guys in the early rounds, you have, to me, like a Zeke Elliott, a Saquon Barkley. I perceive Josh Jacobs to be safe. Derrick Henry being very safe. You could go with a guy that has that wide receiver one upside because we've seen it before, but a guy that's very inconsistent as well, and Keenan Allen, to be your wide receiver 2 or 3, and I think that presents a lot of upside. If you want to go full upside, full risk, that's where if you get a guy like Tyreek Hill, Amari Cooper, and Keenan Allen, you're gonna lose weeks because those guys disappear on your fantasy team, and that's gonna be a very inconsistent roster. Now, the weeks they boom, there's no one that could stop you. There's like that the upside on that team is crazy. So for me, I believe that Tyrod Taylor can get him the ball. I think he's going to command targets. He's going to he's tweeted, he's vocal on Twitter that he's one of the best wide receivers in his conference, and I think that alone will command targets from Tyrod. Tyrod knows that he wants it, and Tyrod should get it. Now, Hard Knocks is on, and it's interesting to see in LA what that dynamic is in LA. Maybe that changes our opinion. Either way, that's it for me, guys. Drop a comment on the YouTube channel, subscribe to our channel, put on notifications so you know every time we post a video. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at snap_fantasy. Mackenzie and my co-hosts are doing a great job trying to provide content for you to help you work through your fantasy teams. The season is coming up quickly, and I hope it's a lot of fun for everyone. So yeah, tweet at me, Landon_FF or Lando_FF to see and to interact with me. If you think I'm way off board and Keenan Allen is a locked and loaded number 1 wide receiver, he's going to return to form with Tyrod Taylor because Tyrod made Sammy Watkins what he was. Drop a comment, let me know. But anyways, I'll see you next time. Signing off.